Welcome to Sky Babies. I'm Lewis Stardust.
I'm Toria the Vast.
This is the Sky Babies podcast. Today we're talking all things CEDH. We're joined here by comedian MTG. Woo! As you know him for being that guy on the internet who plays CEDH, who's won a few time twisters, and who also helps us out here on the Sky Baby set. You can sometimes hear him in the background chuckling or making notes for games. He is one of our Scry guys. Steve is the other, so you can thank them for Sky Babies videos because they work really hard on our sets. Very cool. But we're going to be talking all about CEDH. A lot of people come to our channel to like learn about basics of Magic sometimes, which I always find really interesting.
Poor things.
I know, because we're just two silly little girls doing stuff. But we have been playing a lot of CEDH on our channel. We do one CEDH video a month, and y'all really seem to love that. And we do have people who play in our Discord who really want to get into the game. So we thought we would talk about CEDH, what it is, why you want to play it, and all that good stuff. But first, let's talk about our sponsors of today's video, which is
TCG Player, and I always sound like B. Arthur. I'm not sick. TCG Player is your #1 stop to buy singles, packs, precons, boosters, you name it, they have it.
Yeah, we actually just had a brand new set come out, if you can believe it. Bloomburrow, me and Tori love this set. It's super, super fun. I've already gotten a lot of really cool collector booster cards from this set. The precons are super fun. We're really excited about them. So there's tons of new product from Bloomburrow. You can pick it up on there. And we also have Duskmourn coming out.
Duskmourn's coming out, so you can pre-order Duskmourn, and you can also pick up all your singles there too. Singles for all your favorite formats like Standard, Pioneer, and Modern RCQ Season. Get your decks from TCG Player.
There's tons of new sets coming out. I think we still have like Foundations and a bunch of other things. Not to mention, if you play other TCGs, you can find them all on TCG Player. So thank you again to TCG Player for sponsoring this episode.
Thank you so much. Our featured patron today is Maxwell Oliver. Thank you, Maxwell, for being a patron. It's patrons like you who make these episodes possible. If you're interested in joining our Patreon, check out the link below. We've got cool rewards, bunch of stuff. It's a great place to be. Check it out.
Woo! What did you draw?
A cat dog.
Oh, yeah. There's a cat dog if you like cats and dogs. That is the thing.
And Nickelodeon.
And Nickelodeon.
Don't sue us.
So Ian, before we get into like what CEDH is, do you want to tell people who you are and what you do and why you're here today?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Ian, also known as comedian MTG Online. I am a CEDH tournament grinder and content creator. You can find me on YouTube doing that. I'm also the co-host of my own podcast with Callahan of the Mind Sculptors. That is the Mind Sculptors podcast. You can find us on YouTube if you want to learn a lot about CEDH, the meta, and also our spicy brews as well. And yeah, I'm a longtime tournament grinder at this point, as far as like pretty sure the longest CEDH grinder, as if they can be qualified as such. Yeah, I've been playing the game a good amount. I am doing pretty well. I don't know how else to say it. I'm doing pretty good at the game.
You were #1 on the top deck leaderboard this year.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I have a number of wins, top 4s, top 16s, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I also coach for a living doing that stuff too. Yeah.
All right, enough of that. So we brought you here to talk about CEDH, of course. You've been on our channel a few times playing CEDH. So what exactly is CEDH? How would you describe that to people?
Sure. So CEDH is a just like a subsection of EDH, right? Where the idea is that you have this rule zero pregame conversation where you're saying, no holds barred. We are going as hard as possible. You are attempting to win the game with no other objective. It is really just EDH in its, I guess, like cleanest form, right? In the sense where you're like everyone's on the same page. You are not holding back at all. You are just trying to win the game.
I think that's a pretty fair way of saying that, right? Like, obviously we've played some tournaments where people will come with like a precon and they're like, I just want to play CEDH today. And then there's obviously people who like really grind out. Usually what you see at these events are like the people who just like hardcore focus on making a deck as like viable as possible or like as strong as possible because you want to play the strongest and like fastest cards. Is that right?
I think it's a little like technically dangerous to say the people who show up with a precon are like doing CEDH. It is more so they're misinformed.
Yes. My thing is that I think that in general there has been events where, yes, it's a CEDH tournament for like a big amount of money and somebody will show up with a deck like that because they just want to play, but not realizing what that is. Yeah. And that happens, right? Like, right. And obviously, like, you hear horror stories of somebody being like, I sat down at my LGS and somebody pub stomped me with like a CEDH deck, which I don't really think I've ever experienced something like that. I think most of the time
I did.
Yeah? When?
First time I ever went to Commander Night.
Yeah?
I asked somebody to fill in. I'm pretty sure I talked about this maybe on the channel once. And I asked someone if they would play, and he's like, I only have like my high power Eureka with me. And I was like, I think that's fine. And he won on turn 2.
What'd you have?
Kalia. It was not nearly. I was like brand new too.
Yeah.
But yeah, he beat us all in like 2 turns, and I was like, all right, see you guys later. And I was like, oh.
Yeah.
That was more high powered than I thought. But that was on me for asking a stranger. Stranger danger.
Yeah, I think there's not really a good like threshold of like levels for Magic decks. I don't really think that exists. People will be like, I'm bringing a power 9 or a power 7, and that doesn't really mean anything. I think it's just talking about what your deck is doing. So I think with CDH, at least, when you're saying, hey, I'm bringing a CDH deck, then everybody else could be like, oh, cool. I know what that is, or tell me what that is. Oh, it's this power. Cool. I might not feel comfortable playing, a deck like that with these things. So, in that case, I guess why would people want to play CDH? Like, what is the reason for playing that?
There's a lot of reasons. I mean, so I think the most potent of all is that it is the only like Magic competitive format that is multiplayer, right? And it's the one that has all of these intricacies of what it is like to play a free-for-all game. It's 1 versus 1 versus 1 versus 1, and that's like really where the subtleties and like the really cool stuff happens in CEDH, where you're basically locked in a lot of these, like people describe it as prisoner's dilemma scenarios, right? Where you are trying to do your best to navigate through a game. Everyone has the mutual objective of not losing to X, Y, or Z player, but at the same time, their main objective is to win the game, right? So there's a lot of really interesting stuff that can come from that. A lot of times where you're technically making a suboptimal play in the favor of, okay, but I'm trying to extend this game longer and not lose because of revealed information, stuff like that. A lot of those intricacies. The other one is like Commander's a really cool, unique format, just in a vacuum, right? So 100 card singleton has a lot of variance to it. It's one of the most wide open metas of any competitive format I've ever played in any game, just because there's such a swath of, you can play this thing competitively, you can play this thing competitively. It really has a large gap to it. And and it's also nice to, if you're a Commander player, have that time where you're like, I don't really need that pregame conversation. We're just playing CEDH and we know what that means, and that's really cool. I've also known a lot of casual players who kind of use that as their reason to like avoid the arms race, because we all know those Commander play groups who are like, oh, well, one person brings the broken thing, then the next person brings the broken thing. But for a lot of groups, it can be like, oh, hey, we're going to do all the busted stuff on our CEDH nights, and then we can keep our casual decks silly, fun, lighthearted, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think like I'm a pretty ferocious deck builder when it comes to casual decks. Like when I see you make a deck, you're like, here's Ian Malcolm, he's really bad, and it's unsleeved and it's a mess. And it's not just you like that. I do think a lot of CEDH players are like, here's my like silly guy that I play. When I play, it's like still kind of powerful. Like I put strong cards in there, not anything that's like overwhelming. And if it gets overwhelming, I'm like, ooh, I didn't know it could do that. But yeah, I like the fact that there's like this threshold of being like, here's this really high power crazy thing, and then this like silly thing. Like for me, I love doing a pre-con and like bringing a CEDH deck, and that's kind of what I've been doing for a lot of these local events. I guess for all of us, how do we get started playing CEDH?
So I actually started playing CEDH almost 2 years ago. It was the first time I played, and it was on Play to Win's channel. They invited me on, so gracious of them, and it was my first time playing, so I played Quark Sakashima, and I hit up Ken Bauman and asked him if he could spend a little hour teaching me how to play it, and I won. I won that game, but I also won that game because everyone's like, damn, you just win, and I was like, you're so right. I do. What do you mean? Sure. Yeah, and then I thought it was really fun, but I did unfortunately realize that deck is very complicated, and I do love it, but I don't recommend that as a new player, new to Magic deck. So yeah, that's how I started, and then I started playing more when we started filming episodes on Scrybabies with a bunch of other CEDH players across the multiverse.
I think Quark Sakashima is like the only deck our editor's like, we need to ban this from the channel, because our poor editor has to sit and go through it. And the only time we had it on here has been you, Ken, and Scoop, and all of you like did well with the decks, and also Scoop and Ken like are very good at representing their triggers with the deck, which is like the hardest thing to do. So if anybody's gonna be on here, I'm glad it was y'all. Nobody else is allowed to do it. Nobody else bring it. It's also a deck that like you can't make casual because he's so strong, and when you have two of him, it's just really dumb. So like there's no way to be like, here's my casual, like what would you even do with it? It would have to be dumb stuff.
Like a casual card?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you can't play Sakashima because that's where it becomes broken, right? But you can definitely play, like, I don't know, you should play big spells, right? Because the deck's bad with big spells.
Yeah, I
Because if
guess
you
so.
lose once, you're like, nah, right, I tried.
Yeah, you can't do the 1 mana stupid stuff. What was your first deck and
Oh boy, yeah. So I was playing in the yesteryears of CEDH for sure, but I was playing in a shop in Massachusetts, and it was like right when Nagila came out, and it was one of those decks that like accidentally made people play CEDH without realizing it, because you'd play like 1 or 2 combos with it, and they were like, "Oh, I sneezed and it went infinite," and you're like, "Yeah, for sure." So I was playing with a friend of mine from the shop who was playing Nagila, who had accidentally made it like just under CEDH level basically, and I was playing mono blue double ETB wizards with Naban, but it had like a lot of bounce spells and interaction and stuff like that, because it was just like, what else do you do with wizards entering the battlefield? And he was like, "Hey, you're like interacting really well in this game. You should come try CEDH out. I think you would like it." And I was like, "All right, sure." And so as sort of a meme, I built Fibble Thip as a CEDH deck because that had like just come out. And at the time, yeah, for sure. At the time, you could win with like Proteus Staff and like Paradox Engine and like all of that nonsense. Yeah, big rips on Paradox. So I specifically bought it, and then I was like, "Oh, I don't have a backup plan in this deck anymore. That's pretty bad, huh?" But yeah, I was so tempted to like. I'm always like the brewing guy, right? So like I was like, "Ooh, I get to beat up on the really hard, sweaty CEDH players with Fibble Thip. This sounds so fun."
Wasn't there like a question if the new Fibble Thip was like CEDH viable for like a week? The new one from Thunder Junction.
The one that looks like the Kanye West art?
Yeah.
I think someone did throw that out there, and then I kind of did one of those like side stare kind of things where I was like, I'm not sure that that's a thing.
All right. Well, the effort was there. Yeah. I got started playing Winota. Shocking. I made her for my local game store because I was tired of losing on our like competitive nights, and it wasn't even like CDH. It was just like you would bring a strong deck and you would see if you would get to the top tables, and they would have CDH pods during that time, but they would have to play together. So they like kind of controlled it that way. And I really wanted to play her because I thought she was really strong and really fun. And I built the deck and I won. And I was like, wow, this is really good. It had like combat celebrate and stuff in there. It wasn't like doing infinite combo-y stuff. But I was like, this could be a pretty cool CDH deck. I should look it up. And then I found Ian's channel and I found your Winota video. And then I was like, cool, I'm going to do this for reals. And yeah, she was my first CDH deck. She's a really good one for beginners. She's not like favored right now in the meta at all, but she's a great beginner deck because I think like Nagila and Winota, and we'll talk about some of those later, are really good because a lot of people play them in casual, and so it's really easy to like transition over to CDH by things that they're familiar with already.
Do we have any favorite decks, whether that we play or that we see, things that you want to play, favorite stuff you like to see in, I guess, the meta or off the beaten path?
I've had definitely a number of favorites throughout the years. As I mentioned, I jump around quite a lot between decks, but I think Winota will always have a special place in my heart, especially because, you know, we met over it. Another one I've been really into lately that sort of scratches that like chaotic itch is Atali. I love 7-mana Atali. She's wonderful and beautiful and truly chaotic. And then obviously Kinnan is like one of my most represented decks throughout history, so I think that one has to at least get a shout out for sure.
Nagila has probably been my favorite deck to play so far, just because there's so many options and lines you can run with that deck, which was something I had trouble with when I first started playing Blue Farm. I still think that Blue Farm, or I guess Timnacrom, I don't know if it's really a farm anymore.
The crops are gone.
Timnacrom's great. I love that deck. However, I didn't think that I was skilled enough as a player to pilot it, whereas I don't think Nagila is easier, but I didn't feel as stuck with Nagila. I felt like there were more ways to dig myself out of a hole.
And also does the combat thing that you like.
It does the combat things that I like. I love winning with combat damage. And I also really love Yuriko. I think Yuriko's a really fun deck. I think that one has a lot of surprises, which I like because, you know, you're going off of your flips, and that's something just really, really fun. I recently started playing the Tivit deck. I think that one's really cool. I noticed that has become easier to play as I develop my skills as a Magic player, though. Decks I want to try, Steve actually put together a pretty spicy Roxai list. And I heard that deck's pretty good.
Do not do that to yourself.
Listen, I'm gonna do it to myself.
It's so cursed. Oh god.
I'm gonna do it to myself. I heard it's really good. I heard it's pretty crazy. got some cool stuff in it. I heard Silas is like more attractive than Tivit, so
he's like a robot man. If that's what you're into.
Man.
Yeah, he's got like a robot body, right? Yeah.
Love that.
So-
Abs of steel.
It's just like a little kobold and a that's so stupid.
It's funny.
I love that for
Good
you.
joke.
Guess like my favorite deck is obviously Winota. I love her. I had a lot of fun playing Paco and Halden. That's like a really like fringy, fun CDH deck. I really enjoyed playing that. I'm always looking for new stuff that comes out. Like we've been talking about playing Balin. That was one that came out from Bluebarrow. It's kind of just like make lots of tokens, draw lots of cards. Kind of like reminds me of Najeela a little bit.
I think anyone who liked Winota in the past and wants a deck that is probably a little safer in the current metagame should try Balin out, because it's definitely quirky, it's cute. I had a blast playing it, and also people forgot how to play against a Stony Silence, and it's really funny.
What is, I guess this is the most common question we get asked, is if you're going to start playing CEDH, I assume at this point you've been playing EDH at least. You don't just go like, I want to play Magic. What's this? So knowing that people have some background in playing some Magic or Commander, what deck should a CEDH player start with? From my experience as somebody who was newer to Commander, learned Magic through Commander, and then started playing CEDH, after learning how to play Commander, I think my personal fave deck for someone to start out with is Yuriko, just because I think it still plays very similar to a regular casual deck. Obviously, there's still some like lines you want to go for in Yuriko, but it's not solely dependent on those combo pieces. I feel like you could still win by just having really good plays. And I think it's also only 2 colors, so it's not really like you're not really getting mana screwed as much in there. It just seems like it's an easier, like, the point is here, connect with Ninja.
Yeah, I think it's a really clean win, and I think it makes things a little easy to that, like, turning cards sideways can also just be a win condition.
Yep. That's my vote.
So, like, historically, I think this answer has changed a lot depending on, like, what's good and what's still recognized as, like, a good CEDH deck. But, like, one of the classics, and I think actually 2 of the classics are, like, Najeela and Godo, specifically. Now, Najeela's gotten a little bit more complicated over time because now the modern Najeela deck looks like it has, like, a bunch of different plans in it. Like, sometimes there's the, we're talking about, like, more of a mid-range Najeela, one that's less towards the Adnaz and turbo kind of stuff. Like, that's where things get a little complicated with that deck. But traditional turn card sideways Najeela, play a Derevi, win the game, is, like, really simple to get to. And then Godo is, like, before you know how to counterspell, Godo says, hey, let's just try and count to 11, win the game. I'll watch how people are using the counterspells around me and then pick up these skills over time, kind of thing.
Yeah, Godo is a little terror. I love him. I'm a big play like Tori was saying, like Yuriko, play like Ian was saying Najeela. These ones that are really familiar in Commander because it's easier to switch over with them. I think Najeela can also feel overwhelming because she's so many colors, but I don't think it feels that way when you're playing the deck. It's just kind of like having the accessibility to like dual lands and all these other lands and treasures and resources. It makes it really easy to do the game plan with her, and also like. I like her because of her flexibility that if something goes wrong, you have like 5 other options. Excuse my French, but you have lots of options to go through it with her. I'm always going to suggest Winota. I think she's a great beginner deck as well. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of good beginner decks that we'll be talking about in an upcoming episode. We're going to kind of break them down for you. So we'll have those in a video soon, and we'll also include some primers because I think those are a really great resource to read through on Moxfield. The Godo one specifically is the best primer for a deck that I've ever read, especially CDH. I know Tony's been working on it. I know there's like it's just been a really, really good resource, and it's broken down so easy where I'm like, oh, I could do this because it's laid out really well. So those are always a great resources. If you are looking at a deck or a deck brewer, check out their primers and kind of go through it. You have some good ones like for Winota. Obviously, you were the Winota guy, so that's broken down in there very well. And also, too, you can always go look for a YouTube video. I know Ian's done some breakdowns on like Winota, Sisay, decks like that, and just go through those or go through the combos and like really look at them to make sure it's the right deck for you. Because I feel like sometimes a deck might sound cool, but it might not be the play style that you want. Not everybody wants to play Thassa's Oracle. I've only done it once, ever, and it was on our channel, and then I never did it again, so that's okay. So let's talk a little bit about resources and how I find like places to play, how we get into CEDH. For example, you mentioned we were talking about in general EDH Top 16.
There's a bunch of resources out there. One of the most like well known at this point is EDH Top 16, which is we have a competitive meta game for what makes a deck CEDH nowadays, right? And so you can check on there. You can see what decks are making top 16s. Top 16 being the sort of cutoff, because in most CEDH, obviously it's being a multiplayer format. Pods are 4 players, right? So top 16 is the semifinals. You win the semifinals, you go to the finals with a 4-player pod, right? And so on and so forth. So what decks are making that 16 threshold is usually the decks that are performing pretty well in the format. And I always suggest people, even if you're a brewer like myself, I'm definitely a brewer, even if you're doing that, jump in, kind of get an idea of like what the format looks like, and then from there you can go on to try different decks and things like that.
Online play spaces I feel like aren't as happening as they used to be. There was a lot of people playing on MTGO, which I thought was really cool because you can find CEDH on there, but it's a little bit hard with like infinite combos specifically for Kin and Basalt, things like that. You can play on Spell Table with your friends. We actually have a really good spot in our Discord where people like to play. Play to Win always has people in there. I think Playing with Power always has people in there. If you're looking for places to play, you can support your favorite YouTube channel and go in there. But CEDH tournaments online are just like not really happening anymore, I found. And I think that's one, because there was some issues with doing them online, and 2, we've seen so many events popping up locally and just like around the globe too. Like there was people in Japan, there was people in Portugal. Like I just see stuff all over the place. So which is really cool, because now we have events going on in our local game stores and we can support them that way, which I think is really fun. So any kind of like content or suggestions you have for people for online resources or things to play, how can I as a new player do that?
Yeah, so I mean, there's definitely a lot of channels out there on YouTube and stuff like that for CEDH. Definitely different ranges of experience from each and every sort of creator. People have different focuses in the format. Play to Win, Playing with Power, all those. Those are more gameplay focused channels. Myself and Callahan do the Mind Sculptors podcast, which is definitely learning focused. My own channel. There's a lot of different stuff out there for sure, and there's a lot of different people who are trying to make different types of content out there, and I think there's a lot of stuff. And usually, legitimately, if you want to find like a CEDH primer and you're like, okay, I could read this 5,000 word thing, but maybe I want to hear it from people. I like most of the time, if you just Google like deck name CEDH, most of the time you're going to find someone who has done a deck tech on that list. I think there's definitely still a little bit of space in YouTube right now for more of those as time goes on, because I feel like some of them are definitely dated at this point, which I think Lou and I have talked in the past about potentially getting on the horse for doing so. But there's tons of resources out there. The CEDH decklist database is a bit of an outdated resource at this point, but one of the things I find is that if you're using a website like EDH Top 16, I'll often go over to the database to find like, hey, if I saw one of these decks, like Timnacrom, for example, I'm going to go find one of the primers there under the database, because they have little tags that say that there's a written primer attached to this. And then someone's taken the time to write several thousand words on, hey, how do I play this deck? You know?
A couple things I want to add to that too is that the Spike Feeders aren't making these videos anymore, but they had a video series called Better Know a Combo. So like if you want to get into this format, sometimes the combos, at least for me, because I'm dyslexic, it's really hard to piece those like words together, figure out how they work together, and my brain just works a little bit slower. So having those videos I think are really fantastic. They have all the basic like beginner CEDH combos on there, so if you're wanting to learn and you're not picking it up as quickly, that's a great resource. You can also find them on EDH Rec. So if you go to like the type of combo, they literally write out what the process of the combo is. So if you're like Kiki Jiki and Combat Celebrant, here's how that works, or whatever it is, right? It'll lay it out for you, which is really nice. If you're looking for like Zealous Conscripts and like a Kiki Jiki or any other combos like that, it's laid out pretty well. And I also want to add that all three of us will be at MagicCon Vegas. We're doing a CEDH Learn to Play that weekend. So we'll provide some decks for new players if you want to try a new deck, or you could bring your deck with you. Each table will have 2 different CEDH content creators, so we have a huge variety of them. If we have the poster yet, we'll post it up, and if not, I will be posting about it on social media. It's going to be over near the creator area all day long. So Tori will be there for a couple hours. I'll be there pretty much all day. We have Play to Win. We have Howling Salt Mine guys are coming. We have Girl Pod. We have a lot of different creators who are playing CDH all weekend. So you can come learn to play it there. It's a very fun environment. And because you have two like creators who focus on playing this, if you have questions or like any concerns, you can ask those people and not feel like it, like, I don't know. I felt dumb playing CDH in the beginning.
I still do.
Yeah, because there's a lot of things that like I'm constantly learning. So having two people there that know what they're doing, or, you know, in our case, probably 15, 16 content creators who can help you, is always a really good time. So please come check it out if you're in Vegas on Friday. For those of you not in Vegas, we do have like an intro to CDH link that I will be posting in our description too. And that lists off like the EDH top 16, the database, the like every resource that you can use. Ken has like a statistic website that's on there, I believe, right?
Yeah,
it's there. It's there as well. And then every content creator that we have at these events are on there, so you can find them, and that's a really good resource too. I also want to add, before we stop talking about resources, our very cool editor, Modanon, has a YouTube channel and a Twitch stream. So if you want to support them because they're hot and cool and they have great CDH content, you could do that too.
Many people ask, can you play CEDH casually? Can the C in CEDH be CC, casual CEDH? Is there an issue ever finding this at your local game store? And where can you find a casual crowd to play this type of game with?
Yeah, I think a long time ago, this was definitely a bit of a rarer thing, right? But nowadays, we have tons of tournament CEDH, but there's also just regular CEDH, right? Like just people who are looking to play the format and enjoy it and play at that power level that we sort of established earlier in the episode, but not want to do it for stakes, basically. I know a lot of people who are early community members who are like, yeah, tournaments just aren't my thing, but I still love the format and still enjoy playing the powerful cards and doing the broken stuff and looping docksides and all of that nonsense. But they're like, hey, you know, I don't need to sweat about it. I just want to have fun with my friends, cracking a beer open and playing some broken Magic.
Yeah, I think there's kind of like, we've talked about this too with like Modern and stuff. People will be like, oh, is it only for people who want to play at like their local game store, like in these high level events and do things? But I don't think it ever has to be that. Like, besides the fact of like practicing, I think you can just enjoy playing the cards and enjoy playing the decks too. I personally like to play them because I want to learn what other decks are doing in the meta. So I like to play to be like, ooh, maybe this is a new thing I haven't seen before, or maybe a new combo came out or something else. So I feel like that's like the best way for me to do that. But I also like it because it's usually quick. It's usually pretty quick. There has been sometimes we filmed an episode recently that was like 2.5 hours long.
Yeah.
And we were like, oh my God, we have to leave after this. This is too much. But most of the time, like, we just recorded a gameplay that was 12 minutes long, edited down. So we can film way more CDH in a day, which is really easy and really fun. And if we want to be like, okay, I only have time for a quick game, sometimes it's not always that, but usually it's a lot quicker than playing a casual game where there's like 4 board wipes and you don't know what everybody's deck is and it takes different amount of time and it's long. So let's just talk about like how CDH events go real quick. Not like a full breakdown. I think they could feel really overwhelming. Generally, I think at the start of the day, it's usually like a 10 a.m. or like an 11 a.m. start time at your local game store or local event near you. We talked briefly about finding those events. You can go to Top Deck to find them because there's a lot of resources on there. But for you as like a player who does this often, do you have any tips for beginners who want to go to an event or like what they should expect?
Ian's just gonna be like, don't.
So there's a lot that goes into CEDH and like keeping it at that tournament level, getting ready for it at that tournament level. But the easiest tips I say are like the ones that you would need for every Magic format, like know yourself, know what it means to enter a marathon of a tournament, because at the end of the day, like I can't remember the last CEDH tournament I left without a headache, just because you're in there doing full mental strain for hours and hours on time. Once again, this is all Magic. Know your deck, know the people you're playing against. Generally prepare against the metagame, right? Check out those resources we mentioned earlier. I think this may have gotten skipped over earlier, but topdeck.gg is like a great place to find events near you. It's one of the things I use to be like, oh, cool, there's a store in New Jersey an hour and a half away that I've never heard of, but they're doing a cool event. Yay, I'm going to go. But yeah, prepare yourself, kind of figure out where like your deck is and just have that kind of ready to go for these events. One of the nice parts about CEDH, and one of the reasons I actually do grind the format is because at the end of the day, it is that social format. So I've definitely played a lot of CEDH events where you sit down with the pod and people are relaxed and cracking jokes, because at the end of the day, like, it's cool if your opponents like you. Like, that is also like to an advantage. And so people want to be having a good time.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and take some patron questions. We have a bunch of them today. Our first one is going to be from Tyler, who says, what are the pros and cons of playing fringe decks or meta decks when starting out in CEDH? I think fringe decks are the most fun. Do I think that you going with your fringe deck to a CEDH deck like CEDH Tournament is going to be the best possible option? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. It really depends on how good of you are as a player, I guess.
Do that and let us know how it goes.
Yeah. I definitely, I went and played a year of Paco and Halden, which is definitely not the CEDH meta, but it was really fun to play, and I learned a lot. I top 16 once the whole year with it, and I felt pretty good about that, but it was because I got so comfortable with the deck. I highly encourage that you try other decks to kind of see how they work and understand how the decks work, so when you are playing against them, you're not surprised by it, but it also just shows you a lot of good resources and tools, and not like weird combos that, you know, aren't gonna like help you out in the long run from it. But I don't think you always have to play meta decks. Like, I think Ian's entire brand, which you could talk about in a second, is playing things that aren't meta, because I would just get burnt out if I was playing Tim Necrom at every event that I went to. And if I was playing a Rock side deck every event, I would have no more brain cells. Like, it would just be not great for me. So I get the joy out of playing those decks that might not be, you know, the must fringe. And I understand that going to these events that I might not get to the highest level, but I'm going to work my hardest and really do my game the best and make sure that what I'm doing isn't affecting other players into like losing, I think is the big thing you have to worry about with those fringe decks. Because if your deck does nothing, has no responses, can't work well with others, and then you're just kind of making the table lose, it's a really hard place to be with fringe decks. So if you're going to do fringe, make sure it's got like a really solid win con in there, and make sure you're very comfortable and you know what you're doing with it.
I guess I have a question for Ian about this specifically. As a tournament player, I guess I want to say, I would imagine that a lot of the time, if you're prepping for a tournament, one of the bonuses of playing a fringe deck is I would imagine a lot of people who are playing are mostly practicing and in prep for the meta decks, the big decks that they see all the time. You know, if you're favored to see, I don't know, 40% of the room is going to be playing either Tim Necrom or Roxai, you might not be as prepared for what a fringe deck could bring to the table. Is that something that you also consider when you play these decks at a tournament?
I mean, I've been a brewer, a fringe deck player for my entire Magic career before I even touched multiplayer formats, right? So that's something that I've always sort of ascribed to. And I think it's, you know, brewer's advantage is a very real thing, and there are definitely aspects of it that become very real. We saw this when tournaments just started hitting the scene when Magda first came out, because Magda was able to go 7-0 in a tournament because people were unaware that the deck can actually just win at instant speed with a single activation. They were like, wait, sorry, we're dead right now, right? So these things can happen. It's a little bit harder nowadays, now that the format is sort of established, now that there's information out there on how these things work. But there's definitely times when I've shown up, especially like my recent run with the Master Transcendent, the Follow Commander. I had so many people, because it was like the week it got released, pick up my commander and go, what does this even do, right? And so, like, those things definitely do come up in a competitive advantage, and they are very much there. I think Lua had a really good point earlier where, you know, knowing the established decks and how they work will help you as a fringe brewer, right? So I ate my vegetables. I put in my 10,000 hours, right, before I could start bringing these, you know, sometimes nonsense piles to the format. On the other hand, like, sometimes the decks that I bring that are fun and spicy, 2, 3, 4 months from now they're part of the meta game, right? Mm-hmm. Like, Atali is a great example of that, where like I brought it out, I thought it was kind of silly, and then I did better than I expected on it, and like the month after that it had like a 50% conversion rate across the country, and I was like, excuse me? Now, it's not the best deck in the format. I think Assise is another great example where, you know, 8 months ago, maybe even closer to a year at this point, it was considered like just another like CEDH deck, one of the more gimmicky decks, and now it's consistently in the top 2 decks in the format. Yeah.
Big Tall Cubano says, if you had a preferred style of gameplay, for example, if I'm like big into mid-range, what's the best way to find a deck that will fit your comfort zone? So, like, Najeela, I think, is really good for combat if you want to do that, but also has other options. Winota is a big combat-y deck that has stacks. If you're like, I want to play mid-range, like, where would you find a resource for that? I think it's probably looking through those deck primers and seeing what the deck does. Like, Kinnon's a really good mid-range deck, I would say. But what do you think? Am I taking your answer?
My answer is hire a professional who will do these things for money. Yeah. No, but realistically, like, that is, genuinely why I offer that as a service in my coaching, is because a lot of times people are like, come to me with this idea of like, I like these things. I really want to get into CEDH help. And I definitely have done a lot of work to do that. I know there's resources out there, but as you mentioned, like the video deck text, the primers, the things like that, they do go in on like these strategies and like how they play, right? So if I'm and in general, proxy these decks, right? Like especially when you're first learning the format, do not spend $10,000 on a deck that you might want to play. Like, please, for the love of goodness, like, print it out, try it with your friends at your local game store. Try it first, and even if your intent is not to proxy it forever, you want to buy all the cards, you're a bling lover, sick, rock and roll, do your thing. But try it first, please, because there's so much money you can waste by not liking a strategy you try for the first time.
Our last question is from me. So, as a format, and we talk about fringe decks, and as a brewer, how do you feel about this format being quote-unquote solved? Do you think that there is a kind of like a roof for the decks that keep coming out, or do you think that this is a thing that is entirely dependent now on sets coming out and new cards, or do you think there is still a lot of exploration in the 30 years of Magic where new decks can come out?
Yeah, I definitely don't think the format is solved by any means. I think usually the people who say the format is solved are the people who are least ingrained in the format. Right now, there are currently 4 decks that are leading, I will say, right? Not that they are completely dominant. It is not that you can't play anything else, right? Because the inherent nature of CEDH is like, that's not how that works, because there's multiplayer to balance things, right? But there are definitely 4 decks that are trajectory numbers wise are just absolutely doing very well in the current metagame, and that's Nadu, Timnakrom, Rogsai, and Sisay, right? They're definitely doing a little bit above and beyond the average. On the other hand, there are decks that we have talked about today, like Kenrith and Najeela and Godo, and all these things that are extremely viable in the format. The thing is, Wizards keeps printing broken stuff, and the problems that we are having in the format, or the decks that are currently above the other ones, weren't like that a year ago. So I don't know is the quick answer. And I'm definitely people are behind the scenes trying to work on how to make adjustments to the format while also respecting that EDH is inherently a casual format, right? Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, it really does. Like, Wizards could absolutely just print something that really just shifts things dramatically, and they keep doing it. So we'll see what happens after that. Yeah, Modern Horizons 3 and Lord of the Rings last year specifically were like stupid impactful, and not in a way that Lord of the Rings specifically introduced some of the worst cards in the game for CEDH.
I love playing them. I just don't like them being played against me.
Yeah.
The One Ring is only $130. It's not that bad.
Yeah, and it's crazy. The One Ring is the tamest of the options. Specifically, like Born Upon a Wind and Orcish Bowmaster specifically. It was one of those called shots about a year and a half ago where we were like, oh, this is probably going to warp the format in a bad way. And guess what? It did.
Born Upon a Wind is like less than $1. And it's so good. That card is so good for like 13 cents or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Dumb. Dumb card. All right, so that's everything for just like a little taste of a beginner intro to CEDH. Obviously, we do have a lot of CEDH videos on this channel. We do have a podcast episode coming up where we're going to be talking about a bunch of decks. So if you want to learn more about those decks, we'll have a video coming up soon. We will have that info in the description for other resources and guides if you want to check them out. And yeah, thank you to Comedian for coming out to hang out with us today. You can check out his YouTube channel. We'll tag it below. Anything else you want to plug?
Yeah, thanks for having me, first of all. As mentioned, CEDH coach full-time. You can find me over at comedianmtg@gmail.com if that's something that is of interest to you. And there's a bunch of resources over on my YouTube channel and also the podcast, The Mind Sculptors, as I mentioned, that I'm a co-host of.
Okay, bye.
Bye.